Gear Tasting Radio is brought to you by Imminent Threat Solutions. ITS provides knowledge that empowers individuals with indispensable skill sets to explore the world and prevail against all threats. Right now, as a special thank you for all podcast listeners, we're offering 10% off in the ITS store. Simply use the code GTR to save 10% at store.itstactical.com. Welcome to Gear Tasting Radio, where we offer an in-depth look into the usage and philosophy behind the equipment in our lives. I am joined, as always, by Rob Henderson.
Hello.
And I am Bryan Black. Today, we are going to talk about a more advanced version of lockpicking. So we want to kind of move beyond the 101 into more of a 201 type of thing, and really discuss kind of what tools and things come into play when you're talking about more of an advanced skill. And again, just to put this out in the beginning, this is not for nefarious purposes. These are legitimate purposes that we're talking about, meaning that a lot of people think that lockpicking is a nefarious skill and that it's only used for evil, but that's really not the case. I mean, the reason we advocate it is, much like the story we just told on our, or we're going to tell on Questions Over Coffee this week. If you lock your keys in your car or your RV camper and your kids are inside while you lock your keys in your car. I mean, those are all really good reasons to understand this, especially if you're somewhere remote. You don't want to always have to rely on a locksmith. So, that whole self-reliance aspect comes into play when you're talking about lockpicking. And the lock sport, code of ethics, which we talked about the last time we talked about lockpicking, was you never pick a lock you don't have permission to pick. So that's kind of the deal. Now, when we talk about a 201 topic when it comes to lockpicking, I really want to get more into things like bump keys and bypassing locks, because that's where I feel kind of that next level skill comes into play.
Yeah.
There's, obviously a lot you can still learn picking a lock, but bypassing a lock is truly kind of the next level, I feel. And I will always elect to bypass a lock rather than pick it. So, that's kind of something that I want to say too, so everyone thinks that, or I say everyone, a lot of people are under the assumption that, picking is the fastest way to get into something, but it's really not.
Yeah, it's like any movie you see where they're just like, oh, I'm in.
Yeah.
It's like, man, did he have a key?
No, he was bypassing that lock. So commonly, let's talk about first like lock types, really. So first you've got kind of a pin and tumbler lock, which is on your front door, more than likely, your standard quick set or Schlage. And then you've got like a padlock, which more than likely has a keyway. And then those are probably the two biggest types of locks. I mean, you kind of get in the situation where sometimes there's kind of a doorway you need to bypass or get into that might not have a visible lock, so to speak. So I guess those are kind of the two big ones are padlock style locks, and then of course kind of like your pin and tumbler. Those are probably the two most common locks you'll encounter anywhere. So even like tow hitches on trucks, those more than likely have a keyway, so they can be bypassed or picked. So that's kind of the gist of that. So when it comes to a pin and tumbler, we've talked about it before. You have, pin stacks that meet, and I won't get into the big description that I had on the last one, but I will refer you to the last Gear Tasting Radio we had where we were talking about lockpicking, because I kind of described how a pin and tumbler works. But that way, in a pin and tumbler, there are ways to bypass that, but that more has to do with the mechanism itself, maybe in the door jamb, or I wouldn't even call a pick gun something like a way to bypass. That's really, I guess it is. I mean, that's really not picking. You're more making the pins jump.
Yeah, I feel like it's like brute force picking.
Yeah, and then there's also, hell, drilling a lock is really bypassing a lock. So, and what I mean by that is if you take a drill bit and take a power drill and drill across the shear line where the pins fall, if you separate that pin stack to where the plug is able to turn freely, that's going to open the lock. So the idea, though, I'm going to teach you how to drill a lock, really, but you have to drill in the right place, because if the pins still make contact with that shear line, you're never going to get in
It won't
either.
turn.
Right, exactly. So you would drill and then use something like a screwdriver or tension wrench to actually turn the cylinder itself or the plug to actually disengage the lock. But that it would be a method for bypassing. And then I guess I would call bump key as a way to bypass too. So if you're not familiar with that, if you take a look at your common house keys and you look at the ridges or the peaks and valleys, if you will, on a key, you've got the peaks and then you've got the valleys. So every time you have a valley in a keyway, more than likely it is going to not make a full point. It'll come to like a flat. It'll go down, flat, and then back up. So those flats across the keyway, every time you have one of those little landings, that's the place where a pin stack goes. So in a bump key scenario, you basically would take a blank key and you would cut that number of pins all the way down. So meaning you would have a key that had particular values, like I've got one right here. So
Yeah, because so they go like 1 to 6th.
Right.
And I forget either 1 is the highest or 6 is the highest. But
I've actually got a decoder right here.
Oh, good. I was actually...
So
6 is the lowest.
6 is the lowest.
Okay.
Sorry, 8 is the lowest.
Wow.
You've got 1 through 8,
Okay.
basically, if you have an 8-pin
Gotcha.
lock.
So the bump key will be cut all at 8s.
Yeah, the bump key...
Or 6. I
let's
mean, I
see.
forget. I think Schlegel only goes to 6.
Yeah, so this is... this particular bump key is all cut to 8s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep, so the lowest point that a pin could go is
Interesting.
this. So this will tell you the pin heights. It's not
That's
necessarily the number of pins. So again, they're all cut to an 8, so meaning that pin itself can touch the bottom of this key. And the idea is that you insert the blank key into the lock and you don't go all the way. There's like a one pin, I guess,
Offset.
yeah, if you will. So it's sticking out of the lock a little bit, and then you come around and whack it with the back of a screwdriver or a true bump hammer, which is a better tool in my opinion. And what you're doing is you're causing those pin stacks to jump, and you're turning the key at the same time you're hitting it, so that if you do get those pins to align correctly across the shear line, you're able to turn the lock. Because if you don't have any way of quickly applying a turning force to the lock, it doesn't matter if the pins are across the shear line. They're going to drop down to the lowest point again before you have a chance to turn it. So you have to kind of hold the key in your, index finger and thumb while you whack it so that, you're ready to apply the tension like a tension wrench would, or torsion, whatever people refer to. I've gotten so much grief about. It's not tension, it's torsion. So.
Well, we call it tension because that's what we like.
But yeah, bump keys are a great way to bypass a lock, and I would. So if I had the choice of using a bump key or picks, I would use picks, just because on a common household lock, a pin tumbler, bump keys can be a pain in the butt. So everybody thinks, oh my God, bump keys are so scary. I mean, everybody could come up to your door and just yeah, they could get extremely lucky and do it on the first try, which is probably not going to happen.
Right.
So you hear this thump noise against, your keyway.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is like, what's a better option? A real hammer.
Yeah.
That's the whole deal. Is like if someone's going to make entry, they're going to make entry,
Yeah.
using whatever tools. But the thing with bump keys that I've seen too is that you can't always guarantee you're going to have access around the lock. Some people's locks are like right up against the door jamb and not in a great area for you to hold and get everything set and balanced and then tap it.
Yeah, another thing too is that you have to understand the way the lock turns as well, because they don't all turn the right way. I mean, some people install locks upside down, which, typically the way that it works is they turn towards the hinges. So, you put a key in and you turn clockwise typically towards the hinges and you're going to open the lock. However, many people mount their keyways upside down, and you have to kind of take that into consideration. So yeah, it really depends on what you're dealing with, and you have to really kind of look at the lock first. But those are kind of the two methods. And again, we're not talking about criminal stuff here, because a criminal is probably just going to kick down your door. They're not even going to pay attention to the lock. Most of the time, if they truly want to not leave a trace, yeah, there's that kind of entry. But more than likely it's a smash and grab deal. Most criminals don't really want to come in and, steal the government plans for the spaceship or something like that and not leave any trace that they weren't there. They want to get in and out in 4 minutes and steal everything they can worth that's, has value. So, and then when you're talking, let's kind of move on to, I guess, padlocks too, because that's really where a lot of bypass comes into play. But it also kind of works on a pin and tumbler style keyway too, if the pin and tumbler disengages like a pin. And I'm kind of trying to describe that because in my mind I'm picturing a tow hitch lock. So in a tow hitch, you typically have a key to open that, to separate the pin from the actual lock. So, there's a big, huge bolt or a pin that goes through your tow hitch, and then you've got the lock interface. So when you turn the key, you're actually just disengaging a little pin, if you will, or
that
lever.
Allows it to
It's like a
separate
lever.
off.
It's on a spring, so to speak. So when you turn the key, you're actually disengaging that and pulling the lock off of it and then separating the two pieces, which unlocks the tow hitch. So if you can reach into the keyway and actually move that little device, you can open the lock, and that's really what a bypass is truly doing. You're disengaging the locking mechanism without using the keyway. I mean, you're using the keyway to reach that locking mechanism, but you're completely bypassing the actual pins that would disengage it, if that makes sense. So you never actually have to move the pins. You just need to move the little lever that opens the lock.
So it's basically exploiting a vulnerability of the lock.
Correct.
And I think a lot of times it's because these locks don't have as tight of tolerances because they're cheaper padlocks that are not meant to like lock up Fort Knox. It's to keep your trailer on your truck, while you're in eating.
Yes. And, a lot of people do steal trailers off vehicles and things like that too. So it is a concern, however, and people lose keys to those all the time because they're usually not on their main keychain or key ring. I've opened a few of those for friends. One of them is Jack. We did a video on it like 7 years ago or something like that. But I was able to help him get that off his truck, and we just turned it into a teachable moment.
Save the money on a locksmith.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you're looking at a padlock, if you hold a padlock in your hand, there's a couple of ways to defeat a padlock. It depends what kind of padlock you have too, because some of the security locks, if you're buying something great like an Alloy Protect padlock, you're not getting into that period more than likely. I mean, there's a 99.9% chance that you're not going to get into it or bypass it or pick it or anything other than having the key. It's a very secure lock. So if you're taking anything from this and you want to upgrade your security, whether that's your front door in your house or your back door or your padlocks on your gate, look into Alloy Protect. Those are the best bang for the buck out there. You're going to pay. So when you see the price tag of like $300 for a double cylinder lock, just know that
sit down before you look.
Yeah, they're expensive, but they're worth it if you're really concerned about security. Especially when you start learning about some of these exploits like bypassing and things like that. So in a padlock style, there's two ways of doing that. You've either got a single or a double, basically. So you've got that same kind of ball detent that we were talking about with the tow hitch on either side of that shackle. So sometimes the shackle comes over and there's just one little ball detent that is keeping that locked. And again, that ball detent is disengaged when you turn the key. So if it's a double, that means that there's a ball detent on the other side, even though that's kind of the pivot point of a shackle of the lock. It kind of opens and then turns out of the way. Sometimes manufacturers will put a second ball detent there, and if you're going to bypass, you got to bypass both sides to actually
so it doesn't
get it
allow
open.
it to move up.
Correct. Okay. So if you are looking at padlocks, that is way more secure because it's harder to bypass that style, but not impossible. So there's dedicated shims for padlocks that are out there. There's also, we sell quick sticks and easy decoders, which are very interesting tools. They're in the case of an easy decoder, it's a very thin piece of metal, and it's for combination style padlocks, and I'll get to that in a second. But the main keyway style padlocks, the quick sticks, are kind of a more rigid piece of metal, and those are Tonto shaped. So if you're familiar with like a kind of a Tonto tip on a knife, it has a bevel like that. It kind of comes to a 45-degree angle before it meets the 90, and you put that into a lock, and you basically move that around and depress the shackle until you actually open up the lock. So again, all you're disengaging is that ball detent, and then the lock pops right open. It's when people see that and they actually do it for themselves, they're like, "Oh my god!"
That's the one that gets gasps.
Yeah,
people are just like, "I have that lock on my shed."
Yeah, picking is more of a "I did it" kind of thing, and using a quick stick to bypass a padlock, it's like, "Oh my god!"
Right, they're just evaluating all the stuff they have that on. I'm like, I have to leave.
Yeah, I got a meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
And then with a combination style padlock, it's the same deal, but there's actually a vulnerability in most combination locks is that if you go to the left side of the third wheel, coming from left to right, those little wheels, so usually they have 4 little wheels that change the code, so you have to put in the correct code for the lock to open. And again, it doesn't require a key, it opens by that method. If you put that little shim, so to speak, into that location and, again, depress the shackle while you're kind of lifting or pushing down, which lifts up on the locking dog that's actually
Very
in the
gently.
lock. Yeah. And we've got a cutaway padlock that we sell so you can actually see that working. You can see the mechanism that you need to disengage. And they're very thin because they have to be to get through that portal. So there's a technique to it, and we've done this on video. So we can link to that to kind of show you how it works. But the idea is that you don't want to bend it too much because if it turns sideways, you don't get the leverage you need. It'll just kind of flatten out, and you won't be able to push up that locking dog because it is pretty heavy on the spring, the thing that you need to disengage. So you really need to keep that as straight as possible so you can pop that up with the most leverage. But that's how you bypass one of those. And when people do that too, that also gasping everywhere. But
how to wow your friends at parties.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the real 201 style to picking is really not picking at all. It's understanding how to bypass locks and things like that. And there's many different tools for bypassing, just like we mentioned, quick sticks and easy decoders. There's things that can even bypass more secure locks like the American style padlocks out there. So, really it's just the more that you try to pick or try to bypass locks or accumulate a bunch of locks and start trying to pick them, you start learning about what will open one of them and not the other and which locks are better. Because if I had my choice, I would pick an American lock hands down 10 times out of 10 over a master lock just because I know they are more secure. It's tougher to get into them. Can they be bypassed? Yes, with the right tool. And it's not guaranteed all the time. I've had trouble with Americans even with the correct bypass tool. So they're just a better lock than a master lock, in my opinion. So really it's about learning locks and learning what's good and what's bad and, what to purchase and how to secure your home. Like that's really the take home of all this, of learning the skill. I think maybe primary for people is, being able to get in somewhere if they lock themselves out. But really, I think the more overall value of learning lockpicking is really understanding how locks
getting
work.
The education behind it.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about. I did want to kind of quickly go through my bag of doom, if you will, of kind of what I have.
It's just so much stuff
to take. Yeah, and this is an old 215 gear bag. I don't know if they still make these or not, but there's a lot of little accessories in here, meaning pouches to hold things and. Just to kind of give you an idea of, I've been interested in picking locks since I was probably 12 years old. I just had a basic set that my grandfather got me, and I didn't really pick it up for real until I probably got out of the military. I was very interested in it, and I did some stuff in the military with it. I was fortunate enough to be around people that knew how to do it, that kind of taught me a little bit of basic stuff, but it really wasn't until I got out that I started getting into it. So, I've probably been doing this for, I guess 15 years is kind of what I've probably got into this right now. But so this, obviously what I'm going to talk about is the accumulation of that skill set over 15 years. It's not really like I just went out and bought everything.
Yeah, it just didn't come off the shelf.
Yeah, right. It's just been added to over the years. So, I've got a set of bump keys that probably numbers, 40 or 50 bump keys, because just like we talked about earlier, you have to have the right bump key for the lock. So it's not like you can have one bump key and it'll work everywhere. there's still a keyway change that happens on locks, and you have to have a blank key that's cut correctly for each of those changes of those lock keyways. So that's why my bump key collection is so large. That's what she said.
Numerous.
Yes, because you have to have one. So like what's interesting about bump keys, and I will say this because we're talking about the educational aspect of it, I have learned more about locks from acquiring and using bump keys than I really did. I should say it's a different education, if you will. So like I can look at a lock and go, oh, that's a SC1 Schlage, or oh, that's a SC3 Schlage, or that's a M10 master lock key. So like I know keyways now because I've just learned all that from having to acquire bump keys and knowing what to use. So I mean, Yale locks take different ones. I mean, there's just so many combinations of keyways out there. And again, when you get into the security locks, you're not going to have a bump key for it because they can't be bumped. So, and what I mean by that is things like a Medco lock or a multi-lock and things like that. They have pins that come from the side. They have magnets in them. There's a lot of security features that just make those impossible to bump. But they can be bypassed, some of them. So I'm not going to say they're 100% secure, yeah. So I've got a pretty large bump key collection. I've also just kind of working from what I see in front of me here. I've got a bunch of quick sticks and easy decoders. I've got kind of my go-to Bogota picks. I've got a featherweight tension wrench that I like too. So that's kind of used depending on the keyway. Sometimes all you need is just very, very light tension depending on the lock. And then sometimes locks are really stiff, like the plug and the pin and tumbler locks. The plug can be really hard to turn, so sometimes you have to put graphite in the locks if the pins get stuck. So then I've got a set of, let's see, they're kind of jigglers for cars, and you have to know the right make and the right make and model. And there's a couple that work on a lot of things, but they're really only good for older vehicles. So newer stuff you can't even use these jiggler keys on. So
yeah, I mean most cars don't even have a keyway.
Yeah, so it's really for getting into old cars if you needed to. So a lot of the utility for those just really isn't existent nowadays. And then I've kind of got a warded lock keyway set too. It's kind of like it's the same concept as a jiggler, but sometimes just with the way that these warded lock picks are cut, you can just open the lock up. And what I mean by a warded lock is I'm trying to think of how to describe this in words. So if you took a keyway, so meaning the place that you insert the key into the lock, if I were to take that out, so like the plug itself, if that came out of the lock and you looked at it from a side profile, a warded lock would be a bunch of different discs. So it's almost like you took a stack of Pringles potato chips out of the carton sideways, and you could look at them. So you saw each individual chip. So that's what a warded lock is. The keyway is made up of a bunch of different cylinders, and if you look at them front ways now, if you looked at them from the keyway looking down, they're actually configured with different heights. So that's what gives it
So it's more the cylinder that you're setting, not the actual pin.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So it's not a pin and tumbler lock, it's a warded lock.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, and then I've got a couple of, these are the little kill key things too. If you need to prevent someone from getting into a lock, you can use an old key and file a hook into it and break it off in the lock. I don't really want to advocate that as anything, but if you really, it's for like landlords. If they have tenants that haven't paid and you want to keep them from getting back in while you change the locks or something like that, that's what you can do too. Then you have to use like a broken key extractor to actually get that out.
Yeah, that's not a nice thing. So have permission.
Yes, and then you've also got like bypass tools. I've got some things that will basically do the job of like what a credit card would do in a lock. So those are some things I have. I've also got some bump hammers. I always carry a screwdriver with multiple bits. I've got a couple of wedges for depending on what I'm doing. I've usually always got a pair of trauma shears in here, and I've got some shims, like padlock shims. I always carry a clear lock trainer too, because I'm always around somebody that wants to learn about it too, and it's always great to kind of have a visual example of how a pin and tumbler lock works. I've got a pair of pliers just in case I have to turn a key. If I'm trying to force the lock open, I've got a multi-tool. I've got a pair of hemostats. I've got a little mirror. I've got some graphite, like I mentioned. I've got a Sharpie. These are some. Oh, they're bump hammer weights. So that there's kind of an ounce weight when it comes to bump hammers because it's just like a hammer. You know, the heavier it weighs, the more it's gonna.
So that helps
impact.
you vary the weight.
Yeah,
that's pretty
exactly. Cool. And then, you know, you also got a style of keyway that's
tubular.
Yeah, I just wanted to describe it correctly. So, I mean, a tubular style lock is a vending machine lock.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I kind of wanted to get at. I was having trouble remembering that, but yeah. So with a tubular lock, you have to have a specific pick. So this is a 7 and 8 pin tubular lock. So sometimes they have interchanging parts, so you can use one for both. But they have small pins that actually come down and engage. Because if you look at a tubular lock, I'm sorry, I'm trying to visualize this as well as describe it over audio. So the pins in the tubular lock actually face you as you're looking into the lock. So what you have to do to disengage those is use a pick that goes into that lock, but then individual smaller picks that actually disengage those things. So I'll link to something too, because it's very hard to describe that and the style in which you pick it, because I'm really just trying to describe the tool, and it's not a standard thing to describe. So
no, but in theory, it works much similar to the pin and tumbler.
Yep.
Like the shear line, it's just in a different location.
Yep. And then I've got some security bits because sometimes you'll run into that too. You'll run into just a screw that needs to be undone, and it happens to be a security bit, and you really need that, and security bits come in handy when you need them, for sure. Got a little headlamp, bits for the screwdriver, and then I've got more of like a full-featured lockpick kit. It's a kit from Peterson, and it's more of an advanced style lockpick kit, so it's got a lot of different picks for different situations, which I won't necessarily get into all that over this, but you know, that's kind of a pretty wide complement of things to carry, and you know, it adds up. And I don't carry this around all the time, but if I need it, it's there to grab to help somebody out if I need to. And then we've talked about this before too, but vehicle stuff, like I have a way to get into vehicles too to help people out too, and I've had to do that a couple of times with permission, of course.
Yeah, always with permission.
Always better to do that than break a window.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for listening to Gear Tasting Radio. Remember, if you have questions, use the pound tag Gear Tasting, and we will get them answered for you either here on our audio podcast show or in our Gear Tasting questions over coffee segment that we do on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts if you're listening to us there. If you're watching this video on YouTube, which we're starting to do with podcasts now too, make sure you subscribe and click the little bell to make sure you get notified when we have a new video. While you're there, also please consider giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts, if you will. Helps get our show seen by more people. Apple tends to side more with the shows that are better rated, and then we'll show them to more people, so it'll help us out. So we would love a 5-star review. Thank you very much. And while you're doing leaving a review, make sure you make it humorous, because we have enjoyed reading through your reviews. So thank you very much. Last but not least, check out our Crew Leader membership linked in the episode intel. It's our way of giving you back something for your support. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.